Hello there. We all know that Starfleet is the premier organization within the United Federation of Planets. It is there to lead humanity and all the rest of the Federation member races to a greater, glorious, more noble, more knowledgeable, and more peaceful future. However, is Starfleet really the backbone of the Federation that we believe it to be? Bear in mind the stories that we see. They're the hero stories, the famous stories. The intrepid crews of the Enterprise, DS9, Voyager, the Discovery. We know their stories because they're larger than life. They're stories and adventures that the average citizen of the Federation would never go on, never undertake. Even if they've got their own starship, they'll likely never achieve what they've achieved. So is Starfleet really the hero organization we believe it to be? Certainly Starfleet's very important, but people who are familiar with this channel know that I like to look at the more obscure elements of lore within Star Trek, and that's what we're going to look at today. The elements of lore where it isn't Starfleet, and we're going to see how perhaps we have an argument to make that Starfleet, they may be the blue-collar workers of the Federation, they may be the military arm, they may be who you need when you have a problem, when you need help, but they're by no means the backbone of the Federation. What we mean by that here is there are other organizations, Federation agencies, civilian and government, that exist within the Federation. These organizations are equally, if not more, important than that of Starfleet. For example, these examples are some of the more well-known ones, but they are by no means the only examples of their nature. The Earth Cargo Authority probably still exists in the 24th, 25th centuries, or some version of it. It may still exist even as far ahead as the 32nd century, but we're jumping ahead of ourselves there. So, we've got the Earth Cargo Authority. We have the ECA and the ECS, probably the same organization, it may have just changed its name over time. We have other organizations such as the Merchant Marine. The Merchant Marine were identified as a Earth-based Federation agency that existed in the 24th century at least, although it may have predated that. There was also Space Systems Cargo Service, as well as the Vulcan National Merchant Fleet. These represent some of the better known cargo bodies of the Federation. By no means, again, are they limited to being the only organizations within the Federation, but they are some of its better known. Without these organizations, the Federation would cease to function. Someone's got to move the people about. You're talking transports. We hear them mentioned all the time. We know that traffic at DS9 is like 90 ships a day, apparently, coming and going. Cargo ships and transports would have made the bulk of that. Merchant fleets, civilian vessels, would have easily made up the bulk majority of the forces and ships operating in the Alpha and Beta quadrants, Federation and or otherwise. So, to say Starfleet is the backbone of the Federation is probably wrong. There it's front and center. They're who you see, they're who you encounter, they're who you call them, but they are not the only organization. They are not the organization with which the Federation would absolutely categorically fall apart without. They are not the people that most people in Starfleet will interact with. Personally, when it comes to 21st century, I've seen more civilian ships and privately owned boats and other transport vehicles than I have military craft, aircraft, naval vessels, other such things. This is because compared to how many civilian and cargo and freight and transport vessels exist, military ships, which Starfleet is a form of a military, they are always fewer in number. And as a result of this, you don't see as many of them. Now, there are other organizations as well which we can mention, such as Section 31. Section 31 is technically a Federation agency, although a derivative of Starfleet, an offshoot from it, shall we say. It is not specifically a Starfleet organization. Whether or not you could argue it's more important than Starfleet, they certainly exist and they certainly serve a function. A better example would be local fleets. Now, when I said we were skipping ahead of ourselves before, let's skip ahead to that bit with the 32nd century. You've got the United Earth Defense Force. Now, a key, the United Earth. We still have this concept, even in the 32nd century, of a united Earth, under a Prime Minister, most likely, and a government similar to the one we probably would have seen in the 22nd century. It's always been kind of assumed that the Federation President just has absolute authority over everything, but many local races still retain local governments and administrations. Why wouldn't Earth? Now, Starfleet was originally a human agency. I can see how Starfleet going with the Federation would be a problem for Earth, but Earth clearly carried on. It still had civilian and perhaps local planetary defense forces, maybe descendants of its own original incarnation of Starfleet, still operational, even in the future centuries, the 27th century, for example, when the burn happened, things like that. So you also have the Andorian Imperial Guard. Now we know a lot of these major agencies may be folded into Starfleet, but we know for a fact that these organizations, in one form or another, in perhaps a diminished capacity, still exist, and the reason they matter is in order for Starfleet to go out and do its exploring the final frontier and make all the headlines and be in all the papers, someone's got to be holding the fort back home. Now Starfleet can't guard everything. We know Starfleet has thousands of ships, but there are hundreds of member worlds, each one self-possessing dozens of systems, most likely beyond its own borders. That means thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands, maybe even more, solar systems, or at least areas of space that the Federation is protecting. So that's the solar systems. Then you've got all the gaps in between. Starfleet cannot conceivably ever enforce security over such a huge area. It's why you sometimes get the only ship in the sector, because they probably bloody well are. Maybe not always so close to Earth, that doesn't make any sense, but certainly in a sector of space I can easily see a single Starfleet vessel being the only thing there. So where's everybody else? The reason being, I say it, is the Andorian Imperial Guard, the Vulcan fleet. They'd have to be sticking close to home, still relying on local defences. We know during the Dominion War the Betazoids were invaded by the Dominion, but they did have local defences, their own ships and forces to fight off the Dominion. It's just that they were outdated and not kept up to spec. This is because, again, they rely heavily on Starfleet to do this work for them. But without these organizations, Starfleet would not be able to do what it wants to do. It wouldn't be able to go and explore the final frontier. It would have to stay home and guard everything, just like the Vulcan Navy and the Andorian navies in the past, in the 21st and 22nd centuries, used to have to do. You couldn't really risk sending your ships out that far because you needed them back home for protection. So, again, the merchant fleets, the civilian transports. You've also got other science agencies and medical agencies separate or at least adjacent to Starfleet who operate their own navies and do their own work separate to that of Starfleet. We know the SS Raven was technically not a Starfleet ship, it was a civilian vessel. Probably some derivative of another science agency, we know that. Things like the Daystrom Institute, they operate their own ships. These organizations exist for a reason, to fill different niches within the Federation. Starfleet is one of many. The Federation is far more complicated than we think it is. Starfleet may operate the odd freighter and transport and cargo ship of its own, but they are for its own specific needs. There are actually many civilian agencies, many colonies within the Federation up at the place. Let's look at the Marquis. They had various Condor-class vessels operating from those colonies. Those are civilian ships, originally designed by Starfleet, yes, but they are now civilian use. Without these small nippy transports and cargo vessels, races would become isolated very quickly because Starfleet is simply not big enough to be doing all of it. It can't move people around. Millions upon millions of people every day leaving their planet, going from home either for work or recreation or whatever, leaving their home planet or wherever they live and going to some other planet requires a starship. Starfleet can't provide all of them, so the backbone. I'm saying, are all these invisible merchant and civilian transports operating in the background? Well, in the forefront we've got Starfleet getting all the headlines, and they are the real backbone of the Federation. That's combined with the local militias and navies that would be defending the core territories of all the member worlds, including humans. So that is where this video was going. Simply put, Starfleet is not the only organization within the Federation. By no means should it be regarded as solely the most important agency. Without all the other pieces, it would simply cease to function. Thank you for watching this video. We are now at the end of my little ramble. If you did enjoy this, please consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and also hitting the bell notification icon, because that really helps, especially if you actually want to stay up to date with content from this channel, because just being subscribed isn't enough, and the bell is actually the real subscribe button. With that said, we're at the end of this video now. I thank you for watching, and bye bye. I'd just like to say a thank you to everyone for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoy making these. If you did enjoy it, please consider giving a like, share, and a subscribe, and maybe checking out the other videos on the screen right now, and in the description box below there are links to my other social media accounts.